Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Dr. Kehinde Andrews, who is a professor of Black Studies in the School of Social Sciences at Birmingham City University, director of the Center for Critical Social Research, and he's the author of the just published Back to Black, Retelling Black Radicalism for the 21st Century. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, you're from Britain, right? So you're visiting us, visiting the country. So great to have this opportunity to talk to you about your new book. You were here at Duke about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, the Global Blackness.
At the Global Blackness. So we welcome you back. Talk a little bit about this book and your particular interest as a thinker, as an intellectual in the Black radical tradition.
So it's really good to be in the US, obviously. I mean, the book, Back to Black, really is about saying that we had a revolutionary moment about 50 years ago where in the US, in Europe, in Africa, there were these real revolutionary politics. And what's happened over the last 50 years is we've essentially given up. We've kind of become co-opted, we've become incorporated. Yeah. And we need to go back to that radical politics because we need to understand that it's already too late to pretend that we can ever have freedom, justice, and equality within this political and economic system.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think you begin the book talking about the global impact of Black Lives Matter. We see this movement occur here in the U.S. Of course, it also occurs in Britain. But there's this critique, that some of the British youth were much more invested in Black Lives Matter in the U.S. than they were in their own country. I mean, what do you attribute some of that to?
Well, I think that's the global nature of blackness, right? When we had like 3,000 people, young people out on the streets in Birmingham, another 5,000 in London, and we haven't seen that in the UK for 20 years probably. And the older generation were like, well, they're ignoring the British deaths in custody, et cetera, But I was actually, what it shows that when things happen here, even though it's thousands of miles away, it's still happening to us. That's our people. And then that's felt really in a very visceral level by the young people, and they come out on the street and protest as well.
I mean, the things that were surprising to me, you mentioned that the Black prison population in Britain is actually a higher percentage than there is here in the U.S. I mean, that's something that, we kind of think about Black folks in prisons in the U.S. as kind of ground zero for what's happened in terms of mass incarceration. How have some of the immigration debates, obviously this is post-Brexit, how did it impact some of the thinking around Black radicalism in Britain these days?
Yeah, I think what's happening is that it's showing people what the problems are. And I think even so, if you think about why young people came out in Britain, we have the same problem with the police, we have the same problem with the prisons. It's on a different scale because the police don't carry guns and Britain does not incarcerate as many people. But if you look at immigration law, that's one area where you can see very clearly that the things that we should be getting, we're not getting. So I don't know if you came across the Windrush scandal. Right. Well, this is people who had the legal right, who were basically born in Britain, part of the empire, had the right to be in the country, and then told, we can't find your documents, you're going to be deported, you have to lose your jobs. And that really woke people up to understand.
It's a British version of the kind of birthright citizenship conversation that we're now having. And I'm sure in some ways, Trump has kind of regularly talked about this, right? But no doubt that was another reason for him to kind of double down on that rhetoric. One of the things that's really interesting about the book, you do offer some striking critiques of these intellectual and political movements that we typically think about as being radical. But not necessarily so, right? And so the conversation about Black nationalism, right, and kind of ground zero for your discussion is a group like the Nation of Islam, which is wholly invested in Black nationalism in certain kinds of ways. But the last thing we would really think about them is radical in the sense that we think about radical thought. But yet you talk about the kind of appeal, right? The weak nationalism, the everyday nationalism that becomes this kind of appeal to Black masses. How do we get to a point where folks can re-engage with kind of the radical tradition that's aligned
I think the key
with Black nationalist thought?
The key is political education. Malcolm talks about this, the word revolution has been misused. And largely that's because we forgot about study. That's why Black studies is so important. Because people, they used to read. They used to read all the time. And you'd see through something like the Nation of Islam and weak nationalism. But because we don't do that anymore, and because we oftentimes get invested in politics but don't do the work, we don't understand that actually that's just a bad tradition. There's other ways to think about it. There's more global ways to think about it. So we get stuck in these very narrow nationalist things, which like the nation is not going to take us to liberation. It never was going to take us to liberation. And so even like Malcolm X leaves the Nation of Islam. So if you say you support Malcolm, you then therefore cannot support the nation. Because Malcolm says, look, I'm lefty, it don't work. But we have this all the time, people defending things that don't make sense. And a lot of that is about how we get back to do study and make that part of our activism.
Yeah, it's funny now because, Farrakhan, for whatever reason, is continuing to circulate in the U.S. press. And particularly with, some of the recent attacks, he's been identified, and perhaps rightfully so, as an anti-Semite, right? Yeah. But he's never, in the Nation of Islam, it's never really been associated with violence against Jews.
No.
And in fact, except for like other black people, the Nation of Islam has almost never been associated with violence in that kind of way. But what do kind of, and to kind of take it away from the NOI conversation for a moment, there's a way in which this kind of weak nationalism is also used to undermine the legitimacy of black political movement, amongst whites, often reducing like the most almost ridiculous versions of black nationalism, like stuff that actually doesn't have any gravitas in black communities, to use as an example of why the organizing in black folks is a problem.
Yeah, so that's that. I mean, that's why weak nationalism is problematic. I think I was reading the book. I read some piece about Michael Jackson. They don't care about us. Is black nationalism. What are you talking about? What if that's what black nationalism is? We lost completely. But there's also a way that we undermine our own thing. This is one of the things I'm trying to push back on with the book. Just because it's black, it doesn't mean it's good. And that's the worst version of weak nationalism, where we just defend people like Farrakhan, Bill Cosby gets defended, all these terrible figures get defended.
Well, a bunch of folks that we have elected.
Yeah, I know.
Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. Yeah, there's all these terrible figures because of this weak black nationalism. So we need to move beyond that and say, actually, if we're going to, black has to be political, and it has to be saying work for a particular kind of politics, and that's what makes something black radical, and that's what we should support.
I mean, the same critique you're offering around Pan-Africanism, right? And the great line that you have, black Pan-Africanism is essentially, right, a bourgeois movement, right, that's really about, modernizing, a perception of modernizing Africa within the context of imperialism. And I'm sure most folks don't even think twice about that because, if weak nationalism isn't one stand-in for political organizing, Pan-Africanism is the other one, right?
No, honestly, that was for me to write, that was the most difficult chapter. Because if you grow up in America, Britain, the West, Pan-Africanism is what we think of as being black radicalism.
Right.
But when you actually look back, the Pan-African movement starts in 1900 in the Palace of Westminster. I mean, literally couldn't start at a more appropriate place for what it is. It brings together the elites. They're not talking about revolution or anything like that. They're only talking about independence in 45. Then you look at the kind of independence, it's this nation state, I have my country, you have your country. And you track actually what happens with Pan-Africanism, it leads to the African Union. I don't know anybody that would say that is radical. And that's just the reality of that political project. And so what I'm trying to say in the book is you need to be far more clear about what we're talking about. Garveyism is not Pan-Africanism. In fact, Garveyism was purposely kept out of the Pan-African movement because it had its more revolutionary grassroots self. So let's stop talking about Garvey as a Pan-Africanist. And let's really draw out the difference between Du Bois and Garvey.
I mean, you talk about the fact that, Garvey's part of a group of Jamaicans who actually host Du Bois.
I know.
Right. He considered himself a supporter and a fan of Du Bois, and that changes when he gets to the U.S.
Well, when Du Bois basically calls him stupid, ugly, and black and says, I want no part of what your politics is, right? I mean, let's just be honest about it.
Very personal attack, yes.
I mean, and I think even that, because this is one of the things, black radicalism is based on saying we need unity of all of us. And you always see the radicals will always try and reach out. So Garvey makes a big effort to go reach out to Du Bois. And what does he find? Du Bois is just not interested. And then from there builds a separate project. And we have to understand that we have disagreed with each other far more than we've disagreed with white people. And these are really important disagreements, and they lead to different outcomes. And black radicalism has kind of just become...
And we need to take those discussions seriously.
Yeah, that's a proper discussion. And we just kind of buried black radicalism under these other things, black nationalism, cultural nationalism, Afrocentrism. We just kind of lump it all together. But actually, there is a proper historical tradition which will lead to different solutions if we enact it.
So if you think about black studies here in the U.S., and you mentioned British black studies, Stuart Hall comes up, right? Though Stuart Hall is rarely actually claimed within black studies. No. Gilroy, of course, comes up. You might get a mention of Cobina Mercer. What is black studies like in terms of the rank and file of it in British universities and more broadly in terms of British culture these days?
Well, black studies doesn't really properly exist in British universities. To be honest, I mean, So I'm the second full professor of Black Studies in the UK, right?
Wow.
You have people like Gilroy and Hall. I mean, Gilroy's not Black Studies. I just say 100%. I'm not going to say it right now. This is one of those areas where you say it's black, but it's not Black Studies. Right? And I think that's important because I think we have to have these debates. What makes Black Studies Black Studies?
Right.
And for me, there's two kind of defining ones. One is the politics of how we engage with each other. Right. But the second one is, it's kind of a critique of the university. We have to do things different. We have to be engaged in practice. Right. And unfortunately, Gilroy doesn't match that, right? So let's just say he maybe have some good intellectual ideas, but that's a different project to Black Studies. If you look in Britain, where Black Studies really has existed, is outside the university. So in what we have Saturday schools, which is organised by the community, community education. There's a vibrant history of Black Studies. Right. It's just now coming into the university in somewhat successfhere ways, but also not. I mean,
it's not lost on me that you're in Birmingham City University, right? Yeah. That you're not at some of the other universities.
Oh yeah.
Right, where the population is very different, right?
Yeah. So the city's important, like the tradition's important. Even the fact it's Birmingham City University, not the University of Birmingham. So the University of Birmingham is where, Hall come through, where Gilroy comes through, it's the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies. When they closed that down a long time ago, and all that's left is like a blue plaque, like a historical, like this was here, and now it's no longer here. So I guess it's a somewhat different project than even Hall. I mean, and I've got a lot of respect for Stuart Hall, but I don't know if Stuart Hall would even call himself Black Studies. Yeah.
What has the reception been to the book so far? I mean, everybody now, a lot of folks have seen your clip with Piers Morgan.
Okay.
It's like, I'm sure there are a fair amount of folks in the U.S. like they're like Black intellectuals in Britain. But how's the reception been to the book so far?
Yeah, it's been way too nice. Honestly, people have been way too nice. Nah, you read the book, right? The book is.
Right. I mean, you wrote a book for folks to argue with you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so far, it's written in a tone which is. Like, the philosophy of the book is, it's already too late. Yeah. So we just have to cut to the chase and just make it, and some of that critique's when I read the book, when I read it, I actually spat my tea out at parts of it, because I was like, I can't say that, I'm not going to get away with saying that. But everybody's been way too nice. So I'm looking forward to some, I think in America I get more criticism. I'm looking forward to it.
We just had Chris Tenson through a couple of weeks ago, a great book he did on Liberator magazine, and I asked him the same question. Do you find at this moment that the quality of the debate is really there around Black ideas, right, and around Black studies? I mean, a lot of it comes down to beef on Twitter, right? I got more followers than you got. I had a more snappy comment, right? I got access to better memes than you do. I mean, for the most part, that seems to be, and it's not that folks aren't having substantive debate on Twitter, right? But when you think about that moment that you kind of identified 50 years ago, even before then, where everybody is reading everybody and expecting to grapple with it, right? Do you find that there is a space now for that kind of exchange?
I think so. I think that's been one of the, I guess why I say everybody's been too nice about the book, I think they've appreciated that it has gone and engaged in that sense. And it hasn't just been like, how do we criticize white people? Like, how do we talk about racism? Actually, how do we talk about our intellectual ideas and where we're going? And I think that has been, even if people don't agree with the book, they appreciate that that's the level of discussion. So you can come into the book in different ways, and then we have these events had loads of events around the book, some of them in some really, really white spaces. but it's just all Black people. Literally, it was just all Black. Wow. I think some places haven't ever that many Black people in the place. Because they're coming out, because they want to have these discussions. I think that's really important, is that people really want to have those discussions now, and that's a good sign.
Yeah. What are you working on next?
So the book I'm currently working on is The West is Built on Racism, which is kind of the first, I guess it's Back to Black is like, what do we do about the West being built on racism? This is kind of like the forensic analysis of how everything that we currently have is still built on racial exclusion. And I'm also trying to publish a paper in the Sociology Journal, The Social Theory of Malcolm X. I think it's got about a 1% chance of getting published, but we'll see. Right? So those are the two projects I've got to do at the same time. Yeah.
We've been joined by Dr. Kehinde Andrews, who's Professor of Black Studies at the Birmingham City University in Britain. He's the author of the just published Back to Black, Retelling Black Radicalism in the 21st Century. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, black.